Good afternoon, welcome. Καλώς ήρθατε. Thank you for joining us today for our ACG Alumni webinar. My name is Maria Laina and I am Executive Director of Advancement and Alumni Relations at the American College of Greece. For those who are joining us for the first time, allow me to provide a quick background on the alumni webinars. We launched our webinar series last April with the aim to strengthen and maintain communication with our alumni, parents, and students through value-added activities that provide lifelong development and networking opportunities. The monthly webinars are presented by alumni, parents, colleagues, and members of our community on current topics that concern personal growth and professional development, business, society, technology, communication, and more. We are very happy and honored to be hosting today Dr. Loren J. Samons, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Executive Director of the Institute for Hellenic Culture and Liberal Arts at the American College of Greece and Professor of Classics at Boston University. Born in Arkansas and educated at Baylor University and Brown University, Dr. Samons has taught ancient history and classical languages at Boston University for more than 25 years, winning many teaching awards, including the university's highest honor, the Metcalf Award for Excellence. He has published numerous books and articles on classical Greece, including Empire of the Owl, Athenian Imperial Finance, What's Wrong with Democracy from Athenian Practice to American Worship, and Pericles and the Conquest of History, a biography of ancient Greece's most famous statesman that appeared in 2016 from Cambridge University Press. Professor Samons' scholarly work has centered on the relationship between Athenian democracy and imperialism, the issue of national character, the relevance of ancient history for the modern world, the political careers of Pericles and Thucydides, and his sometime rival Cimon, an analysis of the historians Herodotus and Thucydides. As Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at the American College of Greece, Professor Samons helps to implement the college's ACG 150 strategic plan to utilize education and research for economic and social impact in Greece. Today, he's going to talk about the crucial role the concept of citizenship has played in both ancient Greece and modern times. Democracy and government, by popular vote, have been cited as the greatest political gift the Hellenes bequeathed to the modern world. Professor Samons will argue that this view is both historically inaccurate and demonstrably dangerous, and that it has led to a number of political problems faced in contemporary Western regimes. To recapture the spirit of Greek popular government, we must first recognize the great value and high cost of citizenship. At the end of the presentation, we will have time for Q&A, and you can write your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and of course, write any comments during the presentation on the chat. My colleague, Christina Hanjo, and I will be monitoring the questions throughout the webinar. Jay, good afternoon. Welcome once again. Thank you very much for being here with us today. Over to you.
I want to thank Maria Laina and Allison Townley and the whole alumni relations staff for inviting me to give this talk. It was nice to see the names of some of my friends in Greece among those who have signed up. That's always a little bit helpful when you know that you haven't put off your friends, and maybe some are actually willing to listen to me, spend a little time listening to me tonight. So basically, what I want to do is try to change an assumption an understandable assumption that I think most of you have and most of us have, And that is that when we think about ancient Greece, we naturally think about Athens and Athenian democracy. And to think of this as the greatest political achievement of the ancient Greek world and the most significant one for our world today. But I think that this requires an adjustment. And I hope that you'll leave this talk today and think, well, maybe democracy isn't the first thing I should think of when I think about the political achievement of the ancient Greeks. It was the political achievement of the Greeks was a Greek achievement. Now that may seem obvious to you, but what I mean, it wasn't specifically Athenian. And of course, most of my students at Boston University over the years have come from Athens. And sometimes they tell me that my view of Greek history is insufficiently Athenocentric. And I suspect that maybe that's true, but I can only testify that that's because it's what I believe. I remember having my own views shaken when I got to graduate school. And one of the first things I was told was that the Homeric poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, were probably not written by a single person named Homer. I thought this was absolute nonsense. How could they take my Homer away? I refused to accept this idea for years. And I have come to a kind of hybrid view now that I do believe there was a Homer, and we could talk about that in the questions if you want. But I have been convinced that Homeric poetry represents the culmination of hundreds of years of Greek bards singing these songs. That is, Homer, which you could argue is the greatest literary achievement of the West, is actually the product not just of one mind, but of an entire culture. It's the product of Greek culture. That makes the achievement to me even greater than if it were one man who sat down with a pen and wrote out the Iliad and the Odyssey. And in fact, when you start to look at Greek achievements in art and literature and other fields, you start to find that a whole lot of these achievements are not the result of any one person that we can identify. If you think of something like naturalism in Greek sculpture, the way Greek sculptures almost suddenly, around the year 500 BC, suddenly start to look like real human beings in the way they move or seem to move, in the way their weight is shifted on their feet. But we can't attach naturalism in art to a single individual. It's a product of Greek culture. The same thing for proportion in Greek architecture. How did the ancient Greeks come to this view of temples having these certain proportions? Greek buildings, the proportions of Greek buildings, these beautiful proportions, aren't the work of one individual. They're the result of an entire culture. Just think about black figure and red figure vases, the ancient vases that you see all the time. You go into any museum. This is the work of artisans, of Greek artisans, whose names we generally don't know. We know the name of Phidias as a designer of sculptures on the Acropolis, but we don't know the names of the artisans that did the work on most of the metopes, the frieze, the actual work that put those beautiful sculptures on the Acropolis. In Greek philosophy, of course, we know the names of Plato and Socrates, who are both Athenians. But in fact, Greek philosophers came from all over the Greek world. Aristotle didn't come from Athens. Thales, the other Ionian scientists, Euclid, Ptolemy, Pythagoras, none of these were Athenians. Most of the great thinkers of Greek philosophy were individuals, yes, but many of them not Athenians, and many of them from the diaspora. The Greek diaspora in Italy and Sicily and Egypt already playing a great role in antiquity. So, the Greeks' contributions in art, naturalism, in architecture, proportion, in philosophy, the study of ethics and the soul. What was the Greeks' great gift to the modern West in terms of politics? And most people would say, well, that's the easiest question. It's democracy, demokratia. Okay. But there are two problems with that view. And one is that the ancient Greeks didn't define democracy the same way we do. In fact, they defined it very differently. They considered democracy to be a form of government in which there was a very low property qualification for participation or no property qualification. Okay, so even the poorest citizens were able to vote or hold office. It also required that there be a lottery for office, so that some of the offices, many of them were not held by elections. They weren't filled by elections. They were filled by pulling a name out of a hat. And an average citizen holding those important positions. They also believed that democracy required pay for public service to allow the poor citizens to participate in government, and popular control of the courts. The courts had to be in the hands of regular citizens and not in the hands of the elite. Those four things were what defined Demokratia for the ancient Greeks. Notice none of them have to do with election, okay? Elections and voting do not make a state a democracy in the ancient world. All Greek states practiced voting and had elections. The Spartans, the Corinthians, the Thebans, everyone, whether they had democracy or not. And in fact, what Aristotle says is that if you have elections, you inevitably end up with the rule of the rich. And the rule of the rich is exactly the opposite of the way the ancient Greeks thought about democracy. Now, usually at this point, when I give a talk on this subject, I make a joke about the rule. Of course, we don't have the rule of the rich in the modern world. I mean, how silly would that be? But, you know, it's come to be, I don't think I can joke about it anymore. If you look at, just take American presidents, you know, and ask yourself, do we have the rule of the rich or American senators? It's pretty clear that Aristotle was onto something when he said that if you get elections, you're going to end up with the rule of the wealthy. So we have a definitional problem. Ancient Greeks would look at our government and say, whether it's modern Greece or modern America, any parliamentary or representative style republic, they would look at that and say, that's not actually democracy, okay? And the second problem you have is that Athenian democracy actually wasn't that successful. Now, this is getting very touchy now, as this is a hard thing for us to take, but you know, Athenian Demokratia lasted for about 200 years. And in those 200 years, they had two oligarchical revolutions where the government was overthrown and replaced by a non-democratic government. So I guess if you say 200 years and you only have a revolution every 100 years, well, that's not so bad. But, you know, America's getting on for significantly older than 200 years. Of course, we've had a major civil war. You know, 200 years doesn't seem that long for a successful government anymore. And it's not just about length of existence, you know, or age. You know, the problem with ancient Athens as a success story is that Athens lost virtually every war it fought against other Greek powers. The Athenians were really good at defeating the Persians. They were excellent at defeating the Persians. But when it came to fighting other Greek powers, not so much. So if you just look at Athens' artistic and intellectual output, you know, you can stand that up against any state in history. You can, I'll tell people sometimes, take any modern European state and choose your century, and I'll put Athens in the 5th century up against it in terms of artistic production. There's no question about that, okay? But that's not the only way that we evaluate success. And it's certainly not the way the Greeks evaluated this Athens success. Pericles doesn't brag in the funeral oration in Thucydides. Pericles doesn't brag about Athenian buildings or Athenian tragedies or Athenian philosophy. He doesn't even mention those things. What he talks about is Athenian power and Athens' ability to assert that power over other Greek states. So we have a problem. If we want to claim Demokratia as the greatest Greek, you know, gift to the modern world in politics, we have these two problems. But the answer, I think, is that we have to step back and look at what was the precursor to democracy, and that's the concept of citizenship. That's actually something, citizenship is something that all Greek polis, city-states, had in common. And, you know, when I use the word citizenship in English, that word is very weak. It's been watered down, and, you know, it doesn't even resonate with I think, with very many people, because, you know, they think of it as just something easy to get, or, you know, it's just something that protects us from the government doing bad things to us. And it's kind of a negative concept. You know, citizenship means that the government can't do certain things to me. But the word in fact, when I remember when I was in 3rd grade on my report card, you know, one of the areas I was given a grade in was citizenship, which meant, you know, am I misbehaving in class? You know, I always got my lowest grade, you know, in citizenship. Apparently I was misbehaving all the time. So it's a hard word now, but I want to recapture the essence of that word. For the ancient Greeks, citizenship was not at all a watered down idea. It was a very precious commodity. And the definition of citizenship for the ancient Greeks was a set of duties that you performed in order to earn privileges. The privileges of voting and holding office, what Aristotle calls ruling and being ruled in turn, to participate in government. Yeah, you had to perform a set of duties, and those duties weren't easy. And they basically consisted of doing your duties to your fellow citizens, paying taxes, serving in the military, taking care of your family, and worshiping the gods. Those were the things you're expected to do. I'll say more about that in a moment. But the cost, if we just focus on the military side of this, that you were expected to risk your life, all right? That wasn't negotiable. You're going to have to serve in the military to earn the privilege of citizenship. So it's a very high cost. And because it cost a lot, it was valued. It meant something, it was precious. It also provided you with an identity. And this is something that I think, again, the modern word citizenship, especially in the United States, I think this is less true in Greece and some European states, but that the citizenship provided you with an identity that differentiated you from other communities, all right? A citizen of Athens is different from a citizen of Sparta, different from a citizen of Thebes, different from a citizen of Corinth, okay? He has Athenian political privileges. A Spartan has Spartan political privileges. A Theban has Theban political privileges, okay? So it creates cohesion within a community. Athenians can look at other Athenians and say, I know the things you had to do to earn your Athenian citizenship, yeah? Spartans look at other Spartans, I know the things you had to do to earn your Spartan citizenship. We're all part of a team here, okay? But it's a team that differentiates us from the other teams, okay? Doesn't make us all the same that we all have citizenship. We have a specific kind of citizenship. So this is the environment in which democracy develops as a species, if you will, of polis government, of citizen-based government, of government in which the citizens actually control the state, usually through direct votes in an assembly, not through representatives. Okay, representative government, this is a very different idea from the ancient Greek idea, whether it's Spartan or Theban or Athenian or Corinthian. Democracy and then the whole Athenian flowering of classical Athens in the 5th century, you should think of, I would urge you to think of as the end of a long process, not the beginning. Classical Athens is the culmination of many of these developments in Greek culture, rather than the beginning of something that then we should look back on as the seed. Democracy is a species that grows out of this environment of polis, citizen-based government, in which the citizens actually rule. The Spartan citizens voted whether they were going to go to war with Athens or not. Okay, that decision wasn't made by the Spartan kings. Athenian citizens voted whether to go to war with Sparta or not. That decision wasn't made by Pericles. All right, he had a view on it. He very much wanted the war, but he wasn't able to force Athens into that war. The Athenians voted themselves. So this is a place where it just might be useful to think about the fact that the ancient Greeks didn't have a concept of the state the way we do. We think of the state as a thing, right? So the United States of America does X or Y. Greece does X or Y. Germany does X or Y. France does X or Y. The ancient Greek couldn't have even spoken in that way. They would never have said Athens made war on Sparta. They would have said the Athenians made war on the Spartans. There was really no way to express this collective identity and turn it into a thing. Because in fact, the people who held up their hands and did the voting were the people who went down to the ships and got on them and then did the fighting. Yeah, completely different from, just again, take American government, where we have almost no one in American government has any connection with our military whatsoever. They make the decisions about where to send the military as if it's a separate thing. It's treated as a completely separate thing. And we even have bureaucracies, in modern Western governments that have been reified and turned into things. So we talk about for example, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, the tax service did this to me, is auditing me. The State Department won't let me come into the country. What is the State Department? Well, it's a group of people, yeah, most of whom haven't been elected. They've been appointed. They're 3-4 times removed from the citizens who voted in an election for representatives who then appointed people to work in the State Department. And then the State Department becomes a thing that we have to deal with. Yeah. The ancient Greeks would have thought this was totally bizarre, right? Where are the Americans in this picture, right? Where are the Greeks in this picture, or the French, or the English? That's the question they would have asked. Okay, so I'm setting up citizenship as this ideal, as a valuable thing that you have to earn. And there's an easy objection to this that is reasonably made all the time. But wait a minute, Samons, isn't it true that only men were citizens? And in fact, in many states, only men who owned property. So the poorest were not allowed to hold this citizenship, and women weren't allowed to hold this citizenship, and slaves weren't allowed to hold citizenship, and foreigners weren't allowed to own citizenship, to have citizenship. Absolutely, all true. That's all true, okay? But the point I would make is that it's not actually about the way you determine investment in the society, it's the requirement of investment. That is, the idea behind this is this term, you have to have some skin in the game, right? The idea behind this is that you have risked something, that you've shown something, you've done something, you've contributed something to the society. And in ancient Greece, you could argue that the most valuable thing they thought you could contribute was service in the military. That defending the state, the city-state, okay, defending the Athenians or the Spartans or the Thebans was the most important thing you could do. And therefore, because it's the most important thing, we're going to reward those who do that. We're going to reward them with citizenship, okay? But you see that the principle of you have to be invested in the society doesn't necessitate that investment can only be military service, yeah? It could be child rearing, right? It could be holding a job. It could be creating a job, right? You could come up with a menu of things that allow you to invest in the society. The key is that those investments are recognized by the other citizens, that other citizens say, because you did X, Y, or Z, A, B, or C, we think you should be able to participate in this government. So I don't think it's the military service itself or the status as a male or a free person or what have you. It's this idea of investment that the whole society recognizes as crucial, if our society is going to succeed. And this brings me to an idea of things that are above the political. I think that the ancient Greeks were quite good at recognizing values that were beyond the political, okay? Things that we all ought to agree on if we're going to have, a kind of society. In Athens, when you were elected to office, you went through a process called dokimasia, in which you were essentially vetted publicly. You were tested publicly in front of your fellow citizens. And you were asked questions you had to answer in front of your fellow citizens. And the questions were very simple, but they're also quite personal. You were asked, do you worship the gods? And where are the altars? All right, where do you worship, right? Do you take care of your parents? Your parents, not your children. They assumed people took care of their children. Do you take care of your parents? All right. Do you serve in the military and pay your taxes? So there were 3 questions you were asked. And they basically are, do you do your duty to the gods? Do you do your duty to your family? And do you do your duty to your fellow citizens? Ranked in that order, okay? Anyone at that dokimasia could stand up and say, Now that Samons guy, he doesn't take care of his parents, right? You could be called out in front of your fellow citizens, which means that what you do in your daily life is actually relevant to your ability to serve in office, right? This is an idea that gets way different. You know, we're trying to push this idea to the side, left and right, and for the last 50 years, in at least in American, the American political environment. You know, in the funeral oration, Pericles says, in Athens, we let people live however they want. We're not like Sparta, he implies, you know, where the Spartans are always looking over your shoulder trying to figure out whether you're doing the right thing. No, in Athens, we live however we want. This is a thing that gets quoted over and over and over again from Pericles' funeral oration. But nobody quotes what he says next. He says, but we don't forget about those laws which are unwritten, but are shameful to break. What are those unwritten laws that are shameful to break? Pericles doesn't say, actually, everybody can live however they want in Athens. Not at all. He says, there are unwritten laws that you better not break because, you know, it's going to make you seem shameful if you do. And the fact that the Athenians didn't live however they want is perfectly proved by the execution of Socrates in 399, who was basically put to death for annoying everyone with his questions. And there were political motives behind this, and you know, you could even argue that they were justified. But the fact is that religious belief was used as a lever, a political lever against Socrates. So it's simply not true that the Athenians lived however they wanted. No Greek state did. All Greek states believed that there were these things that more or less everyone had to accept as the principle of our community. This is the word, you know, the Latin words, societas, society, okay, society. That word, it means the socii in Latin are allies, okay? A societas, a society is a group of allies. Now, what makes allies? Allies are people who have a shared goal. All right, they don't have to be exactly alike, but they have to have a shared goal. A society is a group of people with shared goals, okay? Augustine calls it loved things shared in common. That's what makes a society. It reminds me that this is one of the places where I think modern America is so far behind Greece, or maybe we're ahead of Greece in the worst way you can be ahead of something. I remember the first time at Boston University when we had a Greek music concert, and we had 500 people. We filled up the auditorium at Boston University for a concert of Greek music. It was amazing. It was a Greek music ensemble of Boston that played. And when they were through with their program, they started playing folk songs that everyone in the audience could sing. The 7-year-olds, the 70-year-olds, teenagers, the mothers, the grandfathers, they were all singing the same songs. And I remember looking to my colleague and saying, there's not a song we could do this with in the United States. We couldn't do it. It was amazing to me. And it was just one song after another. You know, this is something that's precious about Greece. You know, I'm sure you all appreciate it, but you know, I'm an outsider. All I can say is it's something I appreciate every time I come to Greece and I see there is still something. There is still a society in Greece. Yeah, it really is. Don't lose it. Because unfortunately, it's one of the effects of democracy. And one of the reasons I called that book, What's Wrong with Democracy, is that democracy tends to break this thing down, modern democracy, because it convinces us that all we need to do is vote to fulfill our duties as a citizen. You know how people get that sticker that says, I voted? You know, I don't know if you do that in Greece. In the US, they give you the sticker. Okay, it's embarrassing, right? Like you put this on and walk around like, hey, I voted, I'm a good citizen. Yeah, I walked 40 yards to the fire station around the corner and actually cast a vote and I got a sticker. You know, I must be a good citizen. right? Well, what about all the other things? You know, where's the value in this? It's those loved things shared in common, yeah, that a society needs and has to ask itself, what are the loved things, you know, that we expect people to do, or we expect people to do one of them, just one or two, right? So that we can look at you and go, yes, I know you're a citizen. You contributed. You have investment in this society. Identifying those loved things shared in common, I think, is crucial for a modern society, whether it calls itself democracy or not. This is, now I'll just wrap up by saying something about what we're doing at ACG and the Institute for Hellenic Culture and the liberal arts. You know, if you look around at institutes for Hellenic culture or centers of Hellenic studies, all of which, wonderful, I'm a big supporter of them, but I don't think you'll find another one that puts liberal arts in with Hellenic culture. And there's a reason for that. One is that Americans think they invented the liberal arts. Yeah, Americans think that the liberal arts were invented, you know, in the 19th century at Harvard or something. But they're just wrong about that. They were invented in Greece. And Plato describes education in the liberal arts, by that meaning education to create a citizen, a liber in Latin, a civis in Greek. Liber is a free citizen who's able to participate politically, right? And that's the purpose of the education program that Plato lays out in the Republic. It's to create someone who's capable of governing himself and therefore capable of governing others. You have to be able to govern yourself first, okay? That's crucial. You know, we're trying to think of freedom now in the West, or have been for a while, as some value that can hold us all together, that this can be a loved thing that's shared in common, right? Freedom. But we don't think of it the same way the Greeks did, eleftheria, right? This is not the Persians invading and we have to stop them from taking us over. This is the origin of eleftheria and the relationship between free people and slaves. Okay, this is true. But freedom is not actually a value, I would argue. Freedom is an environment. Freedom is an environment in which you actually show your values. Freedom is an environment in which you can make choices, which are good choices or bad choices. Yeah, but it's actually those choices. Yeah. It's those choices that make the good decision or the bad decision, that make the good citizen or the bad citizen. The liberal arts education is about the creation of character. It's about the creation of people capable of ruling themselves, right? Character, rule yourself first, and therefore being able to participate and rule others. It's not about, you know, knowing the plays of Sophocles or being able to identify Mozart, or tell the difference between an Ionian column and a Corinthian column, you know. Okay, those are nice things, right? But those are byproducts of a liberal arts education. They're not the purpose of it, right? This is, you know, it's understandable that a father or mother don't want to send their kid to school so that they'll come home and, you know, be able to quote, you know, all the plays of Sophocles or Aeschylus. They don't think that's worthwhile. But in fact, those things come along with the education about governing yourself, right? Looking at yourself first. And this is one of the, I think, one of the failings of democracy in the West today, is that it teaches us to look at others and say, they don't think the right way. They're not voting the right way, therefore they're bad. Yeah. But, you know, the first thing you got to ask is what's going on inside yourself. Which is exactly what the message of Plato's Republic is. It's about justice in the person that can therefore replicate into justice in the society. Liberal arts is about character. Yeah, the creation of character, individuals capable of ruling themselves and of others. And character, I think, as much as it's not a word used very often now and makes people uncomfortable, it's still the most important factor in developing good citizens, good leaders, and great nations. Thanks. I'll be happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Very insightful presentation, very interesting. Thank you. We have questions already. So one question from Haris Escalothanasis.
Yeah, Yasu Haris.
So if citizenship is shared duties and values, is multiculturalism subversive of citizenship?
Yeah, is multiculturalism subversive of citizenship? Very good question. Hot topic today. Look, I don't think so, because as long as there are some things that are shared in common, right? Keep in mind, the ancient Greeks didn't look at citizenship as an ethnic thing. Okay, the Athenians and Samians understood they were both of the same stock, Ionian Greeks. Okay, they related to each other, and yet they differentiated between each other as citizens: Samian citizens, Athenian citizens. Right? It's the things that are shared in common, right? Some things that are shared in common. So I would see it just the opposite way, that citizenship is actually a method by which people of different cultures can unite and say, we may have some different beliefs about this or that, but we share these things. You've got to share some things, okay? I'm not going to claim that you can have absolutely widely, completely disparate views and have a society. I think that's a myth, all right? But I'm not willing to concede that you can't have different cultures that still share some of the same values.
So until we receive another question, I have a question for you. So when you deliver this presentation in a US audience, in the US, what is the reaction you get?
Well, when I wrote the book, What's Wrong with Democracy, which was 2004, people just thought I was weird. I mean, who is this Greek historian? He's supposed to be an expert on Athens, walking around talking about problems with democracy. But of course, I was talking about modern problems more than I was Athenian problems. But something strange happened in around 2015, 2016. People started to think maybe he has a point. You know, as soon as people didn't like the results of a particular election, they started to think maybe there is a problem with democracy if it can result in this thing that I really dislike. I've watched attitudes change, and I think there are a lot of people in America now that are perfectly happy with the idea that maybe there is a problem with democracy, but they tend to not look at it the same way I do, but they'll accept the premise that you know, maybe there's a problem. Maybe we need elite control. See, they will go just the opposite way of the way I would go. I'm not in favor of more elite control. To me, that's getting further away from the ideal. I like the ideal of citizen government. But there are a lot of people who don't.
Thank you. So, okay, let's continue with the next question from Konstantinos Papadias. So his question is, if loved things shared in common, which you mentioned, is what defines a society, how are these established? Don't we need some kind of democratic process to establish and update this? Otherwise, isn't there a danger that these shared values may be imposed from above?
Right. Well, yes, there is a danger. I would say you can't actually impose values from above. It's not possible to do it. You can try to do it. It will result in all kinds of nastiness and violence. But many societies have tried to do it. And a part of me agrees with this idea that there should be some kind of democratic process to establish what those things are. But of course, you see what you do then is you put the process first, and you make, in the end, you're making democracy itself the value. If you say we're going to get to the values we have through democracy, right? So I think I would prefer a system that relies on an ancient democratic form, which was the lottery. Rather than voting, let's have a lottery. Let's have a lottery and put 1,500 citizens in a room, all right? Now that's a democratic process by ancient Athenian standards. I would much rather have that then I would have an election for determining something like this. You know, in the end, love things shared in common either exist or they don't. Yeah, they can't be imposed. Identifying them may be difficult. But so I'll argue for reinstituting the ancient Athenian system of the lottery and relying more on that than we're relying on elections now, even for determining those love things shared in common.
So next question is from Manos Varouchas. To which extent do higher education curricula teach citizenship?
Well, they almost all claim to do it now, but they're doing it under the banner of quote unquote global citizenship. And to me, global citizenship is an oxymoron. Global citizenship implies that we're all united. Yeah. Citizenship is not about all being united. It's about being united only with the people that are in your political unit, let's say. Now, what they mean by global citizenship is something like global stewardship, right? Or sustainability. Those are wonderful things. Global stewardship is something that we should all participate in, right? We want to save the earth for our descendants. We want to make it cleaner and better. We all believe those things, but I think the term global citizenship is problematic because it actually tends to undermine the political relationships that we have with the people in our own, political units. So I would like to see global stewardship and citizenship as separate things that are both absolutely necessary. So I don't think that modern Western universities are doing a particularly good job at citizenship per se, even though many of them claim to do it.
So next question from Loren J. How do you think modern society should earn citizenship?
Well, everyone should be an excellent fisherman, number one. If you can catch a fish, you should get a citizen. No. I like to fish. This is, I've gone through exercises with my students over the years where I had them generate, lists of ways to earn citizenship, and they've come up with interesting ones over the years. If you want to ask me about my personal preference, it would be that I would prefer there be a menu, okay, of 20 or 25 or 30 things that you could do to earn citizenship. And maybe you only have to tick off one of them. Yeah, but you'd have to do something. Okay. And I mentioned some before, like taking care of your children, right? Holding down a job for 5 years, creating jobs for other people. I mean, you could come up with any number of things like that. But I'll just say that I don't want, there's a thing I call the democracy trap. The democracy trap is the trap that if we can just change the government in the right way, all our problems will be solved. And in the way that works in democracies, if we can just win this next election, if we can make sure that X gets elected and not Y, then we'll solve these problems, right? But to me, this is absolutely misguided. The problems of society are not political, right? They're civic. I mean, the next election is not the way we're going to solve problems. It's starting with ourselves, governing ourselves, yeah? And then trying to build a society of people who are asking themselves tough questions like, am I doing the right thing or not? Am I acting like a good person? Am I being a good father, a good husband, a good mother, a good son, a good daughter? Yeah, those questions are far preeminent to the political questions. So I'm not sure how well I answered that question. I think I went off on a tangent.
Well, we have many questions, so hopefully we'll try to cover them all. So a question that I understand comes from a student. Our audience is quite diverse today. We have parents, we have alumni, we have many colleagues, we have students as well. So the question is, what advice would you give to the students who want to learn more about the Hellenic Institute, the Institute of Hellenic Culture and the Liberal Arts, and the work that you are doing and get involved?
Well, they can write me at ljs@bu.edu or my ACG email address, which is lsamons at acg.edu, and I'll be happy to talk to you and get you involved. That's a very encouraging question. That's the reason that all of us got into this business of teaching, was because of the students. And I'll tell you, as a rapidly aging man, my hope is in these students, right? You guys and you young women are going to have to fix our mistakes, because my generation has completely screwed everything up. So my hope is in you. So please write me.
So the next question is, again, from Haris Daskalothanasis. So you mentioned that Athenian democracy was not particularly successful. Why did it fail?
Debt. Two reasons: debt and character. The Athenians became a people that would rather rent their soldiers. That is, they relied too much on mercenaries in the 4th century BC. They had, of course, bankrupted themselves in the war against Sparta in the 5th century BC. We didn't invent public debt, by the way. The Athenians had it too. We just invented ways to shift the debt onto our grandchildren. The ancient Greeks hadn't figured that out yet, thankfully for them. But essentially, the Athenian foreign policy in the 4th century refused to see that Philip of Macedon was a serious threat. And they waited until it was too late to take Philip seriously. Now, most people will tell you that the Southern Greeks had no chance of defeating the Macedonians, which I think is nonsense. They did defeat Macedonian armies in later battles. I guess if you think everything is predetermined, then you will believe that the Southern Greeks had no chance to defend the Macedonians and preserve their independence. Well, then how did the Greeks defeat the Persians? The Persian army was far bigger than the Macedonian army, far more powerful. And how did the Greeks defeat the Persians? They didn't stop. They lost at Thermopylae and they kept fighting, right? Athens was sacked twice in the Persian wars and they kept fighting. What happened with Philip of Macedon was they lost the Battle of Chaeronea to Philip. 2,000 Greeks were killed and they gave up. So, I mean, that's not just a matter of military matters. That's a matter of character. So I'm not claiming they absolutely could have won, but I'm saying you can't claim they absolutely had to lose. So it was debt and character, I think.
Next question from Ioanna Gira. Would you suggest that there must be a global shift towards the initial concept of citizenship, as you described it, in order to manage or to deal with the global phenomenon of the deficit of democracy? No,
I wouldn't, because as soon as I hear the word global, you're going to see me pull back. Because to me, the more we talk about global, the more we're pushing things outward. You know, like we've got to solve this problem that the earth is getting too warm. Well, yeah, okay, we do have to solve that problem, but we better solve the problems that are local first, right? We're not going to convince everybody to do the right thing until we start talking about doing the right thing ourselves. So I just think that talk about the globe, but before we talk about our family, let's say, you know, or fixing the problems in our own apartment. Yeah, our priorities are a little out of whack. And I think that talk about something like global citizenship or creating a concept of global citizenship is too big. We've created a problem that we can't solve at that point. And it allows us to distract ourselves from the problems we can solve, right? There are some problems we can solve, starting in the ones in our own life.
Next question from Christina Drakonaki. Doesn't democracy require from each citizen good knowledge of our current political, economic, social environment? Do voters that are uniformed create a danger, for example, the current Trump election?
So this is an excellent question, and I get it a lot about education, the relationship between education and knowledge and democracy. And I'll just say that I've come to believe that that this is not true. First of all, if I had to turn over the government, I'll just use the United States as an example. If I had to turn over the government of the United States to everyone who has a PhD or to everyone who had never been to college, I would choose everyone who had never been to college in a second. I don't think that education has a reliable relationship to good government. I think character has a reliable relationship to good government. Now, am I saying I don't think people should be educated? No, and I'm engaged in trying to educate them. But I don't think the education system as it exists today is doing its job in terms of character formation. It's often deforming character rather than forming it. And colleges, I'm sorry to say, are playing a major role in deforming the character of oftentimes really bright and wonderful young people that show up on the campus. So while I very much believe in education, I'm not willing to tie education to successful government in the way that maybe the question implies. I would tie education to character and character to successful government.
Jay, I'm conscious of the time. I see we have 7 more questions so far. They keep coming. So if we don't manage to cover everything, we can also follow up via email. So let's see, the time. Okay. So the next question is from Joanna Gira again. Please share with us your view on populism and how can this be connected to the distance created from core values of democracy in the contemporary world?
Yeah, well, I mean, populism is a very hot topic, and my biography of Pericles basically tries to show that Pericles was a proto-nationalist and populist. I don't think these things necessarily have to be bad. Populism is almost always a reaction against something else, which is not populism, right? Which is, let's call it elitism. And when people perceive that, yeah, they tend to go the other direction. Although I think Pericles made some bad choices in the 5th century BC, in the end, it was the Athenians who made those choices. They have to be held responsible for them. So I would just say I'm not willing to throw populism and nationalism into a bin and say these are bad things all the time. There's nothing wrong with people being proud of their national state, and of saying we're different than other states. Even saying we like ourselves more than we like other states, all right? This is to deny that to people is to deny them to be human, right? Some people are Panathinaikos and some people are Olympiakos, right? I mean, right? Okay, so we have our teams and we like our teams. Are these things dangerous too? Yes, they are. So I would just leave it at that. The question asked about core values of democracy, and I guess if the questioner were here, I would say, tell me what those core values of democracy are, and do you mean ancient or modern? And then we'd probably be able to have a conversation about it.
So next question comes from Elpida Sonanti. Do you believe that the ancient Athens direct democracy could be applied nowadays?
It could be more easily applied today than ever before because people could, use their cell phones to cast votes. I guess the sub question is there, would I want that? And the answer is yes, if we had a strong concept of citizenship. If you actually had to earn your citizenship and then you got the citizen app, right? Citizen app, right? Okay, well, if we've got a strong concept of citizenship and we use the lottery to fill some offices, yeah, decrease the importance of the vote. Yeah, in that case, I would say yes. The way things are now, absolutely not.
So next question from Demosthenis Kalkiopoulos. What is the thing about the Greek history during the 5th and 6th century BC that led you to dedicate your life to its studying?
Wow, that's a hard question to answer. But I would say that there's something about the Greeks' love of struggle, the agon, and the appreciation that comes through their literature for that, in the historical literature as well as, you know, tragedy and poetry. There's just something incredibly admirable about that, and a recognition that life is really hard, but it's also really valuable. I don't know that any culture has ever captured that dichotomy more beautifully than the Greeks. So I'd say that.
Yeah. So next question, well, I would like to comment, but I won't, because there are a lot of questions, because what you said is, you know, it's very, very important. Next question from Spiros Dovas. If we would adopt the lottery system of representation, for example, in municipality level as a pilot, would you make participating in the lottery and taking office obligatory?
No, I wouldn't. And really, neither did the Athenians. It's a little bit unclear exactly how. Socrates, for example, says, I've never been in a court before in his trial before the Athenians in 399. So he apparently hadn't served on a jury before, even though juries were chosen by lot, essentially, in Athens. No, I don't think I would make it obligatory, but I probably would make other things obligatory. You see, if you make other things obligatory, then people will want to serve in the lottery system because they'll say, hey, I didn't like that thing that we made obligatory. Let's make that thing not obligatory, so I better participate. You know, someone who doesn't care enough to actually participate in that lottery system, I don't think I would want them participating.
Next question from Dimitrios Mitres Siupis. Regarding the definition of society being the collaboration of people with the same goals, could it not also be described by the conflict of goals within the social groups?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question, the conflict of goals within the social groups. I mean, those conflicting goals are always going to exist in a society, okay? So I would just try to be clear that that analogy I used about allies, socii in Latin, all right? Allies don't always agree on everything. In fact, they often disagree on many things, right? The point is they agree on one thing. The point is that they have a goal they're trying to reach together, even if they disagree on everything else. So that's the point, I think, that there has that goal idea, that agreeing on one thing or some things, that's what you need. You can have all kinds of disagreement within a society. You're going to have it. Pericles and Socrates completely disagreed on what was arete. Their definitions are radically different, okay? But they were part of the same society. There were some things they agreed on.
So next question from Despina Gavrili. A sports coach once said that failure is a fertilizer for the future. Do you believe that a failure in the modern democracy is a fertilizer for improvements in citizens of the future?
Wow, what a great question. I find that I want to believe that. I hope that that's true. The problem is that there's so many levels between the citizen today and actual government because of all these bureaucracies and representation and the money that's involved. And, you know, there's so many levels that separate us from actual government. But I'm in an optimistic mood today, so I'm going to say yes. Ancient Greek history certainly tells us that failure can lead to something great. So yes, I'm going to say yes to that.
Next question from Mihaly Pilitsidi. You mentioned previously Aristotle and his statement that through elections, the rich end up creating a government. Mm-hmm. So democracy back then and democracy today are similar in a sense. Right. Does that mean that democracy has major flaws and is not the best, in quotes, political system that needs to be applied after all?
Yeah. Well, keep in mind that Aristotle's point was that was that democracy can't be defined by elections, right? So he would have said, you know, just because you have elections doesn't make you a democracy. It's other things, the lottery, pay for public service. These are the things that make you a democracy. So where you have elections leading to the rule of the rich, that's not real democracy. This would have been Aristotle's point, okay? And I mean, we have what we have. So look, I don't believe in an ultimate form of government. Okay. I'm not out there trying to convert people to being pro-democracy or anti-democracy. I believe in a concept, which is citizenship. Citizenship can exist in republics. It can exist in democracies. It can exist in limited monarchies. It can exist in many forms of government. Okay. It's not just about democracy. Form of government is not the key. The key is individuals governing themselves. Yeah. And then governing others. So, that's what I'm, you know, that's my evangelism is about citizenship, not about the particular form of government.
So last question from what I see. No, I'm sorry. We answered that. No, I think this was the last question. Okay, so thank you very much for the very interesting, very insightful presentation, the very interesting perspective. We also see very interesting and nice comments and many thank yous in the chat for your presentation. So thank you all for participating today. We will also send you an email with the recording of the presentation and with information on how to stay connected with your school. As soon as the webinar closes, you will see a survey. So please take a few moments to answer the survey because your feedback is very important to help us improve and stay relevant. Our next webinar is scheduled for the end of February. It is about technology and how technology can improve our everyday lives with DIRI alumnus John Vasilakos, the CEO and Vice Chairman of Kotsovolos Dixons, and you're going to receive the invitation in a few days. Thank you all. Thank you once again for attending and for your presentation. Stay safe and be well and have a very nice evening.
Yes.